Hello and welcome back, and today I want to continue talking about the subject of WD-RED, WDDA, and this time QNAP NAS. And in today's video we're going to talk about just how it is being handled by QNAP. Compared right now, I would say the big name that people keep throwing around is how WDDA has been impacted and utilised in Synology systems. And even though Synology don't support WDDA in their infrastructure anymore, they're very much in that conversation. And I think it's only fair that we talk about what one of their biggest competitors in this area of NAS server ownership are doing when it comes to WDDA. Now, straight off the bat, I will say I got some good news, I got some bad news, and I've got some I don't know news throughout this video. So if you want to skip ahead, there should be a time bar on the bottom that gives you the salient points. But for everyone else, we've really got to quickly recap just what exactly WDDA is very, very quickly and why everyone is quite annoyed about it. Now, a couple of weeks ago, a friend of the channel, SpaceRex, released a video on his channel where he'd noticed online and had been informed by a client that hard drives, WD hard drives that were in Synology system had started displaying warning signs on those drives. And these warnings that were on the drives there, these were taking place and kicking in just after 3 years of use, and the hour counts. And when that happened, the drive was sending a notification to the host NAS system, I hate seagulls, and then it was putting the Synology NAS system in a warning state. And by that what I mean is the drives were being displayed with a warning on screen. Now you can think of WDDA, or Western Digital Device Analytics, very much as the same as Seagate Ironwolf. It is a proprietary presented range of statistics and health information on a drive that either comprise of completely unique variables or are repurposing and representation of existing values in the smart tests that all drives have on board there. And again, we've made another video about that with SpaceRex that may be live by now. But when it came to that information and notifications coming from the drive, they had to be sent from the drive to the host NAS system. And then it was down to the NAS brand how it wanted to interpret those. Now, once again, Synology have removed this feature from DSM. Ever since mid-2021 in their DSM 7.0 version, that was the last version to have it. And they're up to DSM 7.2 right now. But where are QNAP on this right now? Well, their latest version of their software that's currently in release candidate, which is one above beta, one behind public release, does have WDDA support inside. Now, if you have installed the QTS 5.1 beta or the release candidate, then there is a chance that the WD drives in your system may have WDDA accessible by the QNAP NAS system. If you're running an older version of QTS or the current available public release, which is 5.0.1, you won't have this. Now, if we go into a NAS here that's already got QTS 5.1 enabled, and this is the release candidate, as you can see right there on screen, we've got a couple of different drives there. We can go for this drive here, and this drive is a WD-RED. It's a WD-RED 4TB. I'm just going to move it so my face isn't in the way. The WD-RED 4TB standard class drive there, and as you can see, it doesn't have WDDA. However, underneath, we have got this 8TB drive, and that is one of these, a WD-RED 8TB Pro Series drive. If you want the full ID, why not? WD8003FFBX. Now, what's intriguing is I found nowhere else online that stated that that drive had WDDA included with the drive, either built into its firmware or ready to be accessible by the On NAS service to pick it up, or on the drive to ping the NAS. I had no real guide online, and if you look on some compatibility lists online and some support documents, again, that Synology one we talked about before, they only highlighted 3 drives. None of them were this drive. So this brings into question what drives support WDDA, which is really, really tough to find out in a lot of places. But if we dig into this, because we're going to dig in 2 different fashions, because we went in, thanks to Eddie, we went in with SSH, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But on the top level GUI of the storage manager from within our QNAP here, I'm going to give you some idea about what the difference is between how QTS 5.1 interprets a non-WDDA drive and a WDDA drive. So if we go for this drive here, that standard 4TB, we've got all the usual information there. And again, we go into health. We've got the information we can dig in, find out more about the smart testing there. And again, the QNAP also supports the utilization of Seagate's own Iron Wolf health management there. But if we go for the smart test there, we've got all of the smart results there, all the way chungling along. But as you can see, the DDA there is not available at all. If we go through all the different options, we've got that native command queuing option there. We can schedule the smart tests. We can do everything that we want to do, varying levels of smart tests. It's all pretty much of a muchness. However, if we select the other drive and select health, immediately we can see now Western Digital Device Analytics is visible. So now if we go into the health details, whereas previously we only saw smart, now we've got this new option, WDDA. And as you can see here on screen, we have got these variables which arguably do have slightly more understandable namings than the likes of SMART, which is going to be great for the novice. But the one people are of course concerned about is this one here, power on hours alert, the one that's effectively potentially at the 3-year mark going to ping the NAS to say this is what we recommend, and then of course again it is down to the NAS how it will action that. Now, a few things worth discussing, and again we have downloaded this report and it is available within this article, and we'll be making a separate QNAP article on that very, very soon. But the first thing that really I couldn't really figure out was, is it on by default? Because I didn't enable WDDA at any point here. I was using a pre-existing QNAP that I had, a TS262, that I was already utilizing for testing in another video. So it was already running an older generation version of QTS on there. I believe it was the second before last public release that you can see there. So when I updated to this beta, was WDDA enabled by default, or was it the fact that when I went from the beta to the the release candidate, was it something that in other circumstances it would have been off and the option it shouldn't have been available? There's no way for me to see whether I can turn WDDA on or off, but more importantly, I don't know if it was on by default. Now, before we go any further, I do think it's worth highlighting again, this is a release candidate. It is not a full public build. Also, QNAP, like any other company, has to answer to its critics. Now, what that means is, if people don't want WDDA enabled by default, they probably should listen and then turn that off, or at the very least, add an option to turn it off. Now, they have gone somewhere with that. If you go into the main global settings for all of your storage management, go into disk and devices, you can see that under their predictive migration option, WDDA does have an option there. Now, what that means is, for those that aren't aware, predictive migration is a really cool feature of the new QTS release. If we open up the release notes there, and if we go for it, predictive migration, unfortunately it's not listed there, predictive migration, unlike normal, say, hot spare utilization, where you have a bunch of drives and one of the drives, breaks, your RAID goes into a degraded state, you have to remove that drive, introduce a new drive, and then start the RAID rebuild, which can take many hours, depending on your RAID configuration, if you're running ext4 or ZFS. That can all take a lot of time. Predictive migration is when the system is utilizing available drive health monitoring tools to find small indicators that suggest that the drive is going to die relatively soon. And then what it starts doing is cloning that drive with an available drive. And then what happens is, when the two drives are synchronized, the system will shut down and reboot, and now move the new healthy drive into that array, and therefore eliminating all of that time that you would have lost in terms of degraded performance and sourcing a new drive and introducing that new drive. With a hot spare, it would have been automatic, but you'd still have the RAID degradation and rebuild time introduced. So it is a good feature. Now, if you enable predictive migration, as you can see here, it lists all the available tools it can use to trigger that predictive migration cloning onto the newer drive, and WDDA is included, and you can choose to ignore it there. And predictive migration again is off by default, but again it's the idea that by default WDDA was set to warning there, which I'm not sure how I feel about that. Now, again, these are all things that are subject to change. And prior to making this video, around about a day or so, or a day and a bit ago, I did contact QNAP with my questions here. Now, factoring in time zones, I haven't had a response from them yet, and I will hold off another 24 hours after the recording of this video on the 14th of June to find out if they will give me a direct quote. And if there is a direct quote, I will insert it either at the start or the end of the video and pin it below. But regardless, I am going to give them time to get back to me to at least answer my queries there. But we've got those options there built into predictive migration. But try as I might, I went through the whole system and I could not find anywhere that said by default ignore the WDDA warnings there. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that when the drive hits that 3-hour limit and WDDA does its suggestive, have you thought about maybe perhaps possibly suggesting getting a new drive? There's no evidence here that the QNAP will go ahead and trigger that warning to the end user. There's no information whether it will come up as just a suggested warning or whether it will come up as the drives being flagged as a warning, as they would when a smart test doesn't pass one of its threshold metrics in the background. So again, we can't call them out on we can't call out QNAP here to say that they are actioning that command without knowing it. And unfortunately, I do not have any WD drives with WDDA that are hitting the 3-year limit in hours. You can't really fake those numbers within the drive artificially. Now, beyond this, what Eddie the web guy, ended up doing is he started SSHing into this. Now, as mentioned earlier on, the WDDA has that analytics benchmark there on screen. On top of that, as we've discussed in other videos and with assistance from SpaceRex, we could see that the notifications and warnings that are given to you by the Synology, on the WD side of WDDA, it gave a range of 18 triggers, one of which was the hours trigger, and that trigger gave suggested warnings. So you had the parameter, you had the threshold, and then at the end they had their warning. And then it was down to the brand themselves how they wanted to interpret that warning, whether they wanted to ignore it, whether they wanted to roll it in their own first party speak, or whether they wanted to just defer to WD, and whether to call it a warning, a suggestion, a notification, or just information. And this was what WD's message was turned into in DSM 7.0. Again, not available anymore beyond DSM 7.0. And it was, the drivers accumulate a large number of power on hours throughout the entire life of the drive. Please consider to replace the drive soon. For more information, please contact WD support team. Now, that was their message. On the QNAP side of things, once again, the same document was given to QNAP and the same information was on there. There was all of the parameters at the bottom, the action description that was presented to them. As you can see, that is WD's own message there. Hard drive has accumulated a large number of power on hours and user might consider replacing HDD soon. But the QNAP just cloned that message. So it says there's our description there, and it effectively just cloned the original warning. The QNAP does not present any kind of adapted version of that warning. It simply re-shows the message that the WD does. But unfortunately, nowhere digging through this could Eddie find confirmation that the QNAP definitely actioned that. So at the moment, I cannot stress this enough, we can't say that QNAP actually acts upon these warnings. We can see that the WDDA notifications there in the background exist, but we don't have any confirmation of whether those notifications are actioned by the QNAP at the moment, because we can't artificially recreate that scenario here at the moment. And also, the only information we found while going into the back end was that clearly it was in the code, but we had no indication and a through line that, one, it would be actioned by the QNAP. But more importantly, when we go into the QNAP, let's go back to that QNAP a moment and go into the notification center. We had no confirmation whether the QNAP would present it as a warning or simply information to the end user. Because what a lot of people don't really know about QNAP, unless you've been using it for a long time, is QNAP has a surprisingly robust notification system built in. You can leave it by default and you'll get the baseline notifications, but in the notification center application, you can really dig quite fantastically deep into get tailored notifications. And these notifications break into information, warning, or error. You can add certain keyword filtration. So again, if you are worried about this in the future, you can just go into the event notification area and completely nullify. You can completely clip its wings if you choose, if it is there indeed. But again, it is a very robust notification system they have built in. Moreover, if you go into the logs area, the logs area doubles down on this once again, separating these notifications, information and warnings into different tallies, and therefore scales how you, the end user, want to hear about it. But the more tech-versed user is probably going to get something of a headache navigating all of those options. And there's just plain simple a lot of users that just want to know whether, if that drive goes over the 3-year mark and the WDDA drive software there, the Western Digital Device Analytics, is going to push that notification, they want to know what QNAP, the QNAP NAS system, is going to do. Now, if you've watched this, you now know what the WDDA power on warning is, and that compared with smart, it's not a significant value, and therefore you can choose to ignore it. Sadly, there are lots of people that are not going to see my video, they're not going to see SpaceRex's video, they're not going to find the news online, they're not going to find that information. And what they are going to do is one day come to their NAS device and it's going to say that the driver's got a warning. And if they're a business user, they're going to be thinking, oh, I don't like the sound of that, I'm going to go out and buy some new drives. Even though their drive is very, very healthy in every other regard, and NAS drives are supposed to last a lot longer. Case in point, before this video, I was doing lots of research into an existing NAS system that I have at home, and that NAS system I have is a QNAP. It's a TS253A. I think this is like 2016-17, and it's had the same WD Red 4TB drive inside it since then. It's never stopped, that drive. It's been powered down maybe a handful of times, and obviously firmware updates. That drive works fine. And replacing drives in this manner is not only non-sustainable, it's just dodge. It's not a great thing. And when it comes to an installer, maybe you're a system admin with multiple QNAPs or any other NAS brand in the wild for that matter, you have to admit that even though you know what you're doing, a lot of the users that you're setting up for, or are paying you a monthly retainer, or you do the odd drop-in to check in on, the last thing you want is to wake up one morning and that user saying, all of the drives I got from you 3 years ago are showing warning, what do I do? And then they're panicking, or they can't reach you, or they're no longer your client anymore. And you see what I mean? So in the wrong mindset, warnings like this are very, very misleading. So ultimately, I would like to know, one, does QNAP have WDDA on by default? And if QNAP have responded to me, I will add it onto the end of this video. 2, the WDDA system there, if it is on by default, and even if it's not on by default, outside of when it reaches full release, what happens when I hit that those 3-year hours limit? I want to know what happens to my system. I want to know whether this is going to spit me a warning. I want to know whether I'm going to get an angry notification. Am I just going to get information, or is it just going to flat out ignore it? These are the answers to the questions. These are the questions that I want answers to, and hopefully QNAP will give me the answers just at the end of this video, or they will be pinned in the comments below. Okay, so around 6 hours before I was planning to publish this video, QNAP have got back to me with answers to my questions. So I thought I would slap it on here, and I apologise in advance right now for all the noise of 2 of the NASs over here. We have my laptop over here, and we have a NAS just off camera under there. So I really am sorry for the lack of ability to dampen some of that noise, but they're all in the middle of other tests. But My first question was regarding the default status of WDDA in the QNAP QTS 5.1 Storage Manager. And it was, is it on or off by default? And this was their response.
In the current release candidate of QTS 5.1, the Western Digital Device Analytics service is enabled by default. This was to allow the benefits of the additional layer of on-drive monitoring analysis to be available immediately to the end user.
So let's be honest, I think for a lot of users, hearing that it is on by default is not going to be great news. The fact that it's on means that WDDA services are accessible on the QNAP there, but that might not be the be-all, end-all of it. So my next question was, I was not able to find any means to disable the WDDA service from within QTS 5.1, aside from via an SSH command level action. Is there an option I missed, or is this by design?
QTS 5.1 does not currently feature the option to disable WDDA, not dissimilar to it not having the facility to disable SMART services. Users can choose to access and download the WDDA test results, but they also have the option to disregard its findings. We have also incorporated Western Digital Device Analytics into our predicted drive failure service in QTS 5.1, alongside Seagate Ironwolf Health Management, SMART and our own Drive Analyzer partner service. This is disabled by default and, when enabled, users can tailor the extent to which this information will be utilized in drive failure prediction to greatly minimize time traditionally lost to RAID rebuilding in the event of a drive failure. We will continue to listen to our user base, and if the need for a change on WDDA support and its default functionality is clearly requested, we will of course oblige.
So again, just as we suspected while going through the QTS 5.1 software a few days ago, it does look like it can't be turned off very easily. And when it comes to drive prediction, although there seems to be the option to disable it there or for its actions not to be utilized, still nonetheless the fact that it is on by default with no clear, easy accessible means to deactivate it for me is not good. But again, they're saying they're listening to it, and as mentioned right there at the start, it is still in release candidate form. So there is wiggle room, but to me a release candidate is always effectively what public release is going to be like. Even though they've done 2 release candidates, I think there might even be 3. I think there's definitely at least 2 release candidates of QTS 5.1. So again, not startlingly fantastical news. At least they responded, but unfortunately all they've done is confirmed our suspicions there. And on to my next question there. How are WDDA notifications and alerts handled by QNAP QTS 5.1? More specifically, if the WDDA service sends a warning notification that a drive has exceeded 3 years in hours, how is that message interpreted and delivered to the user in QTS?
Suggested actions are supplied to us by Western Digital, and in the majority of cases, we have not changed this message in our notification center. We do not display this as a warning message, instead classifying it as an advisory. Our notification center and QLog center both allow users to tailor their alerts and actions into information, warning, and error. If a user does not change the default targeting of these groups, a power on hours warning will be treated as information. This is reflected in the current version of QTS 5.1 RC2 and is subject to change.
So again, kind of mixed bag news there. Number one, at least it's not a warning I'm taking from what they've said there. To me, that comes under advisory, which means it will be information on screen, but it shouldn't put the storage manager into a warning state. As mentioned though, I've not been able to replicate this scenario, so I'm going to have to kind of take them at their word on this as they look into it. And also, that caveat there at the end about it being subject to change, I think is another move by the brand. I think presumably in light of recent PR of WDDA that they may be going, yeah, it's like that at the moment, but we can change it if people want it to. So at least there's a little bit of wiggle room there. I think there's going to be a lot of users that are going to obviously draw, myself included, that are going to draw comparison between how Synology removed this feature several years ago and QNAP are rolling it in with QTS 5.1, the beta and the release candidates. But still, nonetheless, it does sound like there is wiggle room there for good or for bad later down the line, but they're just going to keep watching this PR situation pan out, I guess, for WD, and then make their own decisions. My final question was, in the light of current concerns over the handling of power on hours suggested replacement by WDDA services, will QNAP be continuing to include this component in a full release of QTS 5.1?
WDDA is included in QTS 5.1 RC2, and we believe it to be a useful addition to the existing range of drive health and analysis tools at the user's disposal. We will, of course, listen to our customers, and if a need for how drive health information is delivered is requested, we will oblige.
So again, pretty much what we've already heard rephrased there, the fact that it's on there, they think it has utility, but ultimately if people really don't want it there, they will consider removing it. Again, a mixture of good and bad, at least they responded, but I think for the most part, pretty much everything we were wondering and suspicious of the way WDDA has been integrated into the QNAP QTS 5.1 is seemingly confirmed there, with the exception of the notifications. It is good news if those notifications are being delivered as advisories rather than any kind of warning or imminent danger to the storage manager there, which again limits the scope for any kind of friction towards an end user, or maybe you've got client user that's got QNAPs there. But still, nonetheless, I do hope QNAP changes its position on including these WDDA warnings within QTS, because at the moment I think the court of public opinion is not liking this kind of thing. And if you've already got Smart on there, you've already got your own drive analysis tools with DA rollable as an option, Drive Analyzer. I'm not sure why QNAP would continue to want to include this moving forward if at the moment there is a lot of doubt around that power on warning. Even again, if they're open to reinterpreting a lot of those notifications and then changing that whole you've reached a bunch of hours, consider replacement. And even if they manually went in and changed that warning to this drive is now outside of the warranty period, again, they might have to back and forth with WD on that, but that is an option. But this is the state of play of Western Digital Device Analytics and QNAP NAS in the most recent release, release candidate and beta of their 5.1 software. What do you guys think? There should be an updated article coming very, very soon in the comments. Do check that out. If you found this video useful, great stuff. Click like, subscribe, all that usual jazz. If you are looking to buy a NAS solution, we've got links below. We've got the free advice section, NAS Compare free advice. We've got the Ask Community Forum, and we've got the Discord as well. Check those out. We can help you out along the way. And again, use the buy links. You use those. Anything you buy, kickback channel. We get to keep doing what we do. Passive way, support subscribers. What a great shorthand. But apart from that, I'm going to have a drink of water because it's very early in the morning. I've already done 2 videos today, and my throat is falling apart. But apart from that, have yourself a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you next time.